Pust, ani padaidut kaminie. Could you understand what I just said? Unless you speak Russian, you would never be able to understand the words, "Let the little children come to me." Jesus wants to speak to all children in every land, and your church's Sunday school can help. For just $5 per book, your students can adopt an LHF mission project that will provide Bible storybooks to waiting children in other lands. Learn more at lhfmissions.org/children.
You're listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
And I'm Rachel.
We are in our Psalm series. Last week, we had our awesome kitchen table talk with Chaplain Sean Denzer talking about the Psalms and why they're awesome and how we can all use them more. And if you didn't listen to that one yet, go back and listen to that one too. Today, we have more conversation on Psalms. This is a really fun episode. Rachel, what's on the docket for today?
So we all know that the Psalms are scripture, that
Yes.
God inspired the Psalms by his Holy Spirit, that David and others gave us God's word by his Spirit. And we are very grateful for that. And as a result, we often study the theology of the Psalms, which is what we did last week with Chaplain Denzer. But something that we sometimes lose track of is that beyond being solid scriptural truth, the Psalms are also beautiful literature. They're poetry. And some of that comes through in English. Some of it doesn't. Unfortunately, unless you're a Hebrew scholar, you won't be able to see the poetry of the Psalms. But they're beautiful literature. And as a result of that, I wanted to make sure we took time to look at the Psalms as poetry. And to do that, I invited our dear friend and my second cousin, Sarah Reinsel, to join us in the lounge. Sarah is a staff writer and editor for Lutheran Witness and Reporter, following in the family footsteps there, I think. She is also, however, an English major and a former high school English teacher. She taught 4 years at Trinity School at Meadowview in Falls Church, Virginia, which is a rather wonderful classical school, and she's very, very good at literary analysis. So we brought her in to help us talk about the Psalms as poetry today. Hello, Sarah.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight and joy to be here.
Let's dive right in here. I did a little bit of an introduction for you, but could you tell us a little bit about yourself and about your relationship with literature in general? I know you're a book nerd, but tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah. I love to read. I've always loved to read. And I think I pretty much always wanted to be an English major too. And so when I was in college, I got to read all of the great books. I read a lot of Greek literature. I read a lot of American lit. I read Dostoevsky. I also really fell in love with the writings of the church fathers too, which isn't strictly literature, but I feel like they're indispensable.
Sure it is.
I went on to get my master's in medieval literature. So I studied at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. And
That's
so
really cool.
I got to learn
so
Old
cool.
English. Yeah. It was a great year. So I got to learn how to read Old English, and I wound up focusing mostly on text in Middle English. So think Chaucer. He's probably the most famous of that group. And then when I was teaching at the high school, I was teaching mostly the ancient Greeks. So Homer, Greek tragedy, Plato, Aristotle, and things like that.
So ancient poetry is right up your alley.
Yeah, it is. And ancient poetry in translation, more specifically.
Yes.
Which I think is
Okay.
I don't know any Greek. I don't know any Hebrew. Maybe someday I can learn enough to muddle my way through a few lines, but it's a good thing to read poetry in translation. And so it's a worthy endeavor for everybody to do, not just the scholars.
And there's still so much you can get out of it. Obviously, there are certain aspects of poetry that will never come through in translation, but there's a lot that does. I've enjoyed particularly a lot of Russian poetry. It's very dark. But it's amazing how much comes through in translation, even so.
Mm-hmm. You have a very impressive background, and I want to just like get all of those nuggets, especially of Old English, out of your brain. I would love to just know it and not have to learn it because it feels very overwhelming.
Yeah,
it's just so
learnable.
Cool. Now, you said something about church fathers maybe not necessarily being literature. So now I need to know how are we defining literature? What is literature?
I know. That is a really good question. It's a really hard question. So where I would go to start answering this question is I would just think about the word literature, and I would think about like the word literate, and then the root word of literature and literate would be, in English, it's letters. And there's probably a Latin root too, but I'm just forgetting right. But in the Middle Ages, if you were educated, you'd be called a man of letters or a master of letters, which basically just means that you're literate in the sense that you can read, but you've read everything that there is to read. You've read all of the good stuff. Yeah. I bring in that historical context just because I think literature, we have to think that there is some gravity to it. There's some greatness to it. It's been handed down and treasured for centuries. And it's something that we ought to strive to love and learn from as well. So I think that's pretty essential to the definition of literature is some kind of greatness and some kind of like love that we should cultivate in ourselves for it.
So not just books, the good stuff, you said.
I thought so. Yeah, right. And then I guess, Sarah was asking about the church fathers. Yeah, literature as opposed to theology, as opposed to philosophy, as opposed to history, as opposed to books about science. Yeah, I think we're probably going to funnel our conversation into things that we would think of as like what you would study in an English class. So it's not, it's not a lecture or an argument or a speech or like a scientific analysis. We're looking at a story or we're looking at an image. We're using things like similes and metaphors to help us reason about things and know things rather than maybe like a syllogism or something like that. So I think that's part of what literature is too. It's extremely imaginative. We rely on stories and characters and novels or images in poems to tell us something about ourselves and the world.
Okay, so I'm kind of getting 3 different possible definitions for literature from you. One is anything written. Like if it has letters, it's literature. Mm-hmm. One is the good stuff, which definitely includes the church fathers. Mm. But then perhaps this is the definition we're working towards, is this idea of the good stuff, but that primary goal is related to artistry. That it's writing as an art form that also includes some sort of deeper meaning about the human condition or, the divine, to use a very secular friendly word. So just like not every picture is art, not every book is literature.
Right. Yeah, correct. Okay. Yeah. Right. So I think that's, the good stuff would be like, like I said, there's some kind of a greatness to it. It's timeless and inexhaustible. Something, even though it was written in a particular time and a particular place by a particular person from a particular perspective, there's something in it for you and for me that we can learn and glean from.
So in that, it also ages well.
Yeah.
And speaks to people in many different times and places. Sarah, all about Sarah, our usual Sarah. Phil said, this is going to get weird, you guys.
I know.
There's 2 of us today.
I know.
You can go with Sarah G and Sarah R.
Okay.
The same too. I love it.
Hymn nerd Sarah, you know very well there are songs, and of course hymns count, I think, as literature. But there are some that really only speak to their immediate context, and some that 1,000 years later are still resonating within our souls.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And those are the truly great literature. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got literature. Since you're really good at answering hard questions, what is poetry?
Yeah, what makes poetry poetry?
It's got a rhyme, right?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right.
So yeah, there are a lot of ways to go about answering this question because there are lots of kinds of poetry. But I guess I like to think of poetry as Okay, well, I'm just going to throw out some things and then let's see if we can whittle something down from there. So you can think about poetry as it has to have a certain form. So you can think like a sonnet has to have 16 lines. You can think of a ballad. A ballad is a short narrative of the story of how a martyr maybe, or the story of a murder, or both. You could think of like a haiku, where it has to have a certain number of syllables and it's only 3 lines. It's 575 or is it 757?
In English, it's 575. Although I understand in Japan, there's more to it than that.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right. But so
it's a really hard art form.
Yeah. So basically, there are very strict rules in order to make it qualify as a sonnet. Or I don't know. There are other more obscure ones like a villanelle, which has to be 19 lines and 5 stanzas. 4 of those stanzas are 3 lines. The last one's 4. Right. So there are these very intricate forms where like, okay, that's this kind of poem.
Sestinas.
Right. Exactly. A sestina.
Tetzerima.
There, you could think about iambic pentameter and blank verse. So every line has 10 syllables and is written in iambic. So it has a certain stress on stress, stress on stress.
But what about free verse? William Carlos Williams wants to know, what about him?
I love free
I know.
verse.
They're the ones who make this question complicated. And then you could also think about, so I was also wondering, okay, so actually I'm going to bookmark free verse because I was also thinking about what makes a poem a poem. We can also approach it in terms of music. Like I think a lot of poems are either written for the sake of music. So like hymns, you could think about Homer's epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. They were meant to be sung. The Psalms were written to be sung. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of odd and unusual that we don't have any idea what Homer's epics would have sounded like. And I don't think we really know what the Psalms would have sounded like either.
No.
I think that's been lost. Yeah. But poetry is written, even poetry that isn't written for music. So like William Carlos Williams, say, or W.H. Auden, or even like Shakespeare. So Shakespeare's definitely, there's a performative element to it, as in it's a play. Even poems that aren't meant to be sung are meant to be read aloud. So a poem is written with what it sounds like in mind. And so you have things like rhymes or alliteration that you use as you write a poem. And so I think someone like W.H. Auden would have, he would not have written his poems to be set to music, but he certainly wrote them to be read aloud. And I think they're best appreciated read aloud. You can certainly are supposed to read them to yourself too, but there's this musical quality to them, to how they are composed. I think so even more so than Charles Dickens writing his novels or Jane Austen writing her novels. Like those books sound great read aloud, but it's not quite the same intent there. That's another approach I would take to poetry. It's song-like and it's written in verse. Mm-hmm. So line breaks matter. It's part of how you read the poem. You look for enjambments and things like that, or the way it's organized. So how does that sound as a start of defining what poetry is? Oh, I have one more way. Poems rely on images.
Yeah, there's a lyric quality to it.
Yeah, lyric quality, and poems rely on images. Yeah.
A rhythm to, and a musical quality to the words. A good poem, not only does it sound good in the ears, it feels good in your mouth as it's coming out. That's really weird to say, I realize. But you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
This makes me happy to say it. It's just so good.
Yeah, and like even free verse, it's free and like it doesn't necessarily have a specific structure to it. But I like what you're saying about when you read it out loud because it still has rhythm. Like the words still mean something. They're still specifically chosen to have a rhythm in a certain way that you say it, that you hear when you say it out loud, even if it's not specific structure. Like
every syllable
you still
has
feel
a
it in a certain way. Yeah, exactly.
So is that something that transcends languages and cultures? Poetry worldwide always has a rhythm and or sound element to it, like that defining aspect?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't know everything about poems from all the far corners of the earth. I think I could boil it down to that being pretty essential.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you add into it what you said about imagery. and the idea that poetry uses words to paint pictures in your head and somehow convey some deeper meaning through those kind of unrelated images.
I wonder if poetry is to literature what dance is to music. In that it's one of those that like sort of combines things. Because you were saying it has a form.
Maybe what dance is to movement.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Where you're doing all the sorts of same things that you would do like when you were playing basketball, but it's artistic now.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful.
I like that. Yeah.
I love it.
Okay. All right. We got to talk about some Psalms here. This is a softball question. We can all say yes on 3. Are the Psalms poetry? 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
Yes.
Jump to the gun.
Okay, but the question to you, Sarah Reinsel. How do we know?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would point first to the imagery that they use. Yeah, I think that's the main way that they communicate to us. So I think about like, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul pants for you, O God.
Gorgeous.
That is the image of that poem. And it sticks in our minds and speaks to our hearts. Or I think Psalm 1, the man who delights in the law of the Lord is like a tree who's planted by streams of water and bears fruit each year. I'm paraphrasing, so I think that's just poetry through and through, and it's the best poetry there is too, I think. And if I knew Hebrew, then I would probably also point to meter and rhyme scheme and different formal qualities that are classic trademarks of Hebrew poetry, but I don't know quite as much about that. I think also the poems are just express the deepest longings and emotions of the human heart too. Like I was looking back at like some of the imprecatory psalms where vindicate me, O God, vindicate me. or like I think and I have Luther's translation of Psalm 130 stuck in my head more than the ESV, but from depths of woe I cry to you, or cry to thee. And I think that's another thing that poetry does, which it gives form, like I guess like music, it gives form and structure to the deepest emotions of the human heart and gives expression to those. So I think that's another very easily recognizable hallmark of poetry, of the poetry of the Psalms specifically, that I think anybody can read and recognize in translation too. So
yeah, I think you're so right in that even though Hebrew poetry has its own conventions, that there are certain strategies, poetic strategies at play that sort of transcend those. I've done some digging into this through my, vocation as a homeschool mom and teaching creative writing classes to homeschoolers. And one of the things, and we'll talk about this more at the end, one of the things I always do is focus some time with these, Bible-believing Christian homeschool kids on the Psalms and help them sort of look, okay, beyond simply rhyme and rhythm, what makes a poem a poem? And Hebrew poems, of course, they do a lot with alliteration. They do a lot with acrostics that just doesn't come through in English. But there are things that they do that are sort of unique and a really interesting form to play around with this intentional repetition, this parallelism of ideas, and either building off of or contradicting what just came before. There's this idea, and Sarah, maybe you know about this from your work as an ancient scholar. Have you ever heard of chiasm? I love chiasms.
Yes.
Where it's basically, imagine a butterfly, only it's ideas. And it's symmetrical on either side, building to a point in the middle. And you could see like the entire poem sort of revolves around, if you just followed the ideas into their central point, you'll like see it right in the middle of the psalm. And it sort of funnels in and then back out. There's so much there that we don't know or don't notice that is just high art. The other thing that I'm so glad you pulled out those images, because one thing we are in danger of, and I love the fact that we are so biblically literate, And by we, I don't just mean the four of us, but everyone listening to this podcast. But sometimes these images are so familiar to us that we don't even notice them.
Mm-hmm.
Think about something like, we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. We sing that every week in church, or, every couple of weeks in church. And we don't notice, oh, wait, that's a metaphor. That's a poetic image. It's a really powerful one, too. If you've ever seen a flock of sheep clustering around a shepherd. Yeah, I totally miss that because I'm too familiar with it. Or think Psalm 23. He leads me beside still waters. Oh, goodness, I love Psalm 23. I promise you I have it memorized. But as soon as I put myself on the spot, I can't remember it. But again, it's full of images that we're so familiar with, we almost miss that it's poetry because familiarity breeds a lack of attention or something.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think every once in a while then when you have, I guess maybe like the imagery of like of sheep or of trees or the natural imagery especially, we're probably susceptible to getting so used to that we stop paying attention to. But every once in a while in the Psalms too, you do come across one that's like on earth. The one I was thinking of was how beautiful it is when brothers dwell in unity. It's like oil running down the beard of Erin, which that's got to be one of my favorite images in the Psalms. But definitely you have to read it twice before you realize what is happening.
So are the people who translate, so like on Bible translation committees, are the people who translate Psalms the same ones who translate Leviticus? Or are they sort of like, is that a different specialty? Like the ones who are translating the poetry are not necessarily the ones who are translating the history. Or does that not, I mean, because translation it's a tricky thing. And so do you have to, I feel like you have to sort of have a bit of the poet in you to translate poetry.
Yeah.
So do they seek out poets, or is that, I don't know, is that something that you have to make a decision when you're making a translation? Are you going to prioritize poetry of it? Or how does that work? Do you know anything?
I have never been on a Bible translation committee, but I do know that they are always having to decide between exact literal translations and something that works well in English. Because languages are
constant
weird.
Judgment calls. It's so tough.
And Chaplin talked a little bit about that last week when we asked him about which translation to use. And there's all, because you always lose something in translation from another language that some of it you can get and it may not be as faithful to the actual words of what you're translating from, but it may be more beautiful. So yeah, there's always some give and take. I'm sure we can find some biblical scholar that has been on a translation committee and ask them that question, though. We know
that would be great.
Because now I want to know, too.
Well, so Sarah, do you have a favorite translation in which to read the Psalms?
That's a good question. So I was doing a little, so I have my grandpa Mausel's Book of Common Prayer that he gave to me. And so that's usually where my go-to for reading the Psalms. And I just had assumed that it was King James Version, like the King's English. That was the translation of that Psalter. And then I realized that it was actually Miles Coverdale's translation. So this is really interesting to me. And I would love to, Sarah, do you know all this already?
No, I don't.
Okay. So I would love to talk to Chaplain Denzer about what translation to use. But so I did a little bit of reading up. And so the first English translation of the Bible was John Wycliffe's, and that was in Middle English, which is not modern English. The first modern English translation was by Miles Coverdale in like 1530-ish. And my sense is that it was pretty quickly replaced by the King James Version. I don't know all the politics or the history of the King James Version really, but I do know that,
right?
Yeah, right. So it's later. I do know that once the Book of Common Prayer came about, though, people loved Miles Coverdale's Psalms so much. They were already so popular that they replaced the King James Version Psalms and they used those Psalms instead in the Book of Common Prayer.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And so I think it's probably a combination of they were popular and familiar and people just liked them better. Whether they're actually a better translation, I don't know. They are beautiful English, though. And so I think that's that's my preference. I think a lot of like Anglican chant that we sing, like Sarah, I think, and Sarah and I both sing in the International Center choir. And for Holy Thursday, Maundy Thursday this year, we did Anglican chant psalms. And I'm pretty sure that translation was Miles Coverdale. So they're very musical. They lend themselves well to chanting. But if it's a good translation, if it's an accurate translation, I know the King James Version has problems. I'm sure this one does too, but it's very pretty English. And so I'll just go back and look at the ESV if I have questions. But
yeah, I know a lot of people, there are certain Psalms that they learned in the King James, and that's the one that captures the poetry of it. I remember learning the Psalm 23, which I promise I know, in the King James, because that was what my mother had learned. And then I went back and read it in the NIV, which was what I used when I was a teenager. And we go from the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, to the NIV, which is the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing.
Ugh, gross.
And so it's interesting that when you look at the ESV, it is translated. Do you want to guess? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. There we go.
So I guess this is a question to the ESV translators. Did they take a lot of cues from the King James Version for the Psalms specifically because they are poetry?
That would be an interesting doctoral thesis right there. Surely somebody knows. But I think in that case, they recognized that the poetry of this psalm in translation worked so well that they didn't need to get fancy or be different. Just go with it because it's beautiful. I shall not want is so much better than I lack nothing, or I've seen I shall not be in want.
What are some of the like universal poetic devices and things that we see in the Psalms that we can recognize when we're reading them?
We kind of started talking about this earlier, but I do want to do a deep dive into this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can think repetition, certainly. I think which number is it for his love endures forever, for his love endures forever?
Oh,
it's in the hundreds.
It is.
But
this is my husband's favorite psalm.
137?
136, but let me check. Oh, give thanks to the
You're
Lord.
Right. 136.
Good. We know our stuff. We do.
Oh, and 118. Well, okay, both of those do that. I think I probably thought both of those psalms were the same psalm until this very moment.
Me too, probably.
There are two of them that have for his steadfast love endures forever on repeat. So I suppose that's one. Rachel, I'm curious, is there a good psalm that we can see the chiasm really clearly in translation?
Oh man, I was thinking parallelism, but let me check my notes.
Or parallelism is fine too.
So great. I'll get back to the chiasm in a minute. I don't think I have a good psalm for that. Because by the way, the Psalms aren't the only Old Testament book that is poetic. This has been a problem throughout this series and will continue to be a problem where I keep thinking of poetic language and it turns out it's in Isaiah.
I was just going to say.
Or Proverbs or Song of Solomon, or that half of the Old Testament books of prophecy have these same poetic features. Like think about, just earlier today, I was thinking of the trees of the field will clap their hands. That's Isaiah.
Yeah.
He gives beauty for ashes. Also Isaiah. But let's talk about parallelism for a minute, because this is really the thing that psalmic poetry does all the time. Like almost every psalm does this in abundance. This idea of rhyming ideas rather than rhyming words.
Yeah.
Where you've got, and this is why so many of the Psalms have 2 lines in each verse. Have you noticed that? The line breaks? Because often they are parallel. They're either synonymous, where you are repeating the same thing. For example, we've got Psalm 3. Lord, how they have increased who trouble me. Many are they who rise up against me. That's basically the same thought repeated, but with different words. You've got antithetical parallelism, where you've got 2 lines and one of them says one thing and the other says basically the opposite. Wait, I had a great one for this.
Yeah, well, Psalm 3 continues I lay down and slept. I woke up again, for the Lord sustained me. Like sleeping
there we go.
and waking.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've got this opposite idea. You say one thing, you say the opposite thing that still contributes to the message of the psalm. And then you've got this synthetic parallelism. I know, big words, but this idea where you've got multiple lines where each one is sort of ratcheting it up a little bit, like building on, almost like a pyramid structure. Psalm 1 there's a great example of that here. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. It's a kind of and then parallelism of like, we'll just go keep building this thought up. And so once you learn to look for these, you'll be seeing them all the time. It'd be like, oh, he just repeated that in different words. That's synonymous. Oh, he just said the opposite. That's antithetical. Oh, he's obviously building this thought piece by piece as he goes. That's synthetic. And it is one of my favorite aspects of psalmic poetry. And even though it is this ancient thing, often in my own writing, I'm thinking, how can I incorporate this? Because it still works. It's a timeless literary technique that can add to some real beauty and richness to any writing it's applied to, as long as you aren't redundant.
So can I just ask real quick? So you said it's synthetic parallelism. As you're saying this, that's not the usual use of the word synthetic that I think of, correct? I usually think of the word synthetic as being artificial.
Artificial.
Is it really that? Or is it somehow like synthesis? So it's like,
yes,
like it's combining multiple things into that. Is that, I think that's more
think about what
the
artificial actually means. It means built, created,
okay,
put together, assembled.
Got it.
Not organic.
Okay.
So if you think of that older meaning of synthetic, artificial, that it's something that has been crafted.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Psalm 8 is a chiasm.
Psalm 8 is a chiasm. All right. I want to look at that.
Google, I cannot take credit for knowing that out of my brain folds. I had to look it up. But Psalm 8 is a chiasm.
Okay. We are all cruising over to Psalm 8 right now.
Yes.
I was hoping to talk about Psalm 8 today too. So.
Oh, good. All right. Take it away, Sarah Reinsel.
Oh, well, let's see. So I would have to sit down and parse out the chiasm, but I had Psalm 8 in mind for another answer to our what is literature question. This is backtracking a little bit.
Okay.
I love this. And maybe, do you think this is the point? This is maybe the central point of Psalm 8, like the center of the chiasm, without even parsing out the rest of it. But what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? I think that question, like good literature should answer that question. And that's how, if you can tell literature is good if it's taking that question seriously. But that's backtracking.
Yeah. Well, and if you'll notice that thought is, so this is a 9-verse psalm, and it begins and ends with, O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. That's the beginning. That's the end. And then we see in verse 2 and 3, the glory of the Lord in the heavens. We have strength. And then if you go up from the bottom, verse 8 mentions the birds of the heavens. And then we've got above that, the beasts of the field. So we've got the glory and strength of the Lord mirrored in the birds and the beasts. And then you've got verse 3, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, we've got the work of creation. But then in verse 6, you've given him dominion over the works of your hands. And we have man's work, steward of creation. And then right in the center of this poem, at exactly what you point out, Sarah, here's the point. What is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. So you've got a poem that folds in on itself. And that question, Sarah, you're so right, is at the heart not only of this psalm, but kind of at the heart of the human experience in relation to God.
I was also thinking, if we go back to, well, I guess the imagery of the mouths of babes and infants, and then on the one side, and then we have, well, let's see, that it's going to parallel with, the birds and the fish. I don't know. I think I think I like this poem a lot because it considers man as a creature and yet slightly above the creatures, or a little lower than the heavenly beings, but there to take care of the creatures. And then the situating of man in the middle of the sheep and the oxen and the birds and the fish and whatever passes along the paths of the sea. I like that line too. What is it that passes along the paths of the sea? We don't really know. There's a lot of stuff down there that we don't know about. So there's a lot of, I don't know, just a lot of awe and wonder at creation. And maybe that's something else. This isn't a device so much as a reason I love this psalm and a reason I love literature is that inspires wonder in you. Like you sort of, like it goes beyond just amazement. It's just like you're stunned with your own smallness and creation's greatness and God's greatness. Kind of amazed at this great mystery that you've been given a little bit of insight into now and will someday know fully.
Yeah.
And literature, I think kind of gonna take its cue from this psalm and say, okay, let's engage in this imaginative act.
Now I'm just in awe at that device, the paths of the seas. I love, obviously I'm a sailor and a sailor's wife, and I just love that image. And now it's making me go back and look at the other images you've mentioned, out of the mouths of babies and infants. Well, that's a weird image. If you stop and just pause on that for a minute, who would choose a baby to be your herald? Like, make way for the king. It's ironic and jarring. And if you stop to think about it, it trips you up and makes you think that, or the idea of you have put all things under his feet. No, actually, no, that is hyperbole. That is irony. And yet it stops and makes you think, okay, this is the level of exaltation that God has spiritually granted to the children of Adam. What's under my feet right now? I've got about probably a square foot of carpet. That is what's actually under my feet. But this psalm says all things, including this very crazy list of moon and stars. Like we read them so quickly, we don't even notice what's happening here.
It's fun to sit with this one now because like my brain is creating this work of art in my head and like this cool animation of what this actually looks like. If you just sit with it for a hot second, it's just so cool. And like how it reflects Genesis and the creation story. And I love it now. This one might be my new favorite song.
And then the incarnation too. Like, I was thinking, Rachel, you said like, how weird is it to have a baby be the herald for the king? And then how weird is it that a little baby is our king?
Huh. Oh, and now I'm seeing that. Now Jesus is here. Great.
Yeah,
I know.
right.
I love it. And now I'm seeing John the Baptist sleeping in the womb. Yeah.
And what is man that you are mindful of him? What is man that you would become a man too?
It's so good.
Yeah, it's
good
just
poetry does that to you.
Yeah.
And this is like the best poetry. So
Right. Read it slowly, read it out loud, read it again and again. Memorize it.
Okay, what else about the poetry do we need to talk about? Like, I feel like we're missing something.
And with this poem in particular, or more broadly?
Just any we can move to a different psalm if you like. I could spend a little more time with this one, but
I was thinking about, well, let's see. I'm trying to find. I was just going to bring up a question that you had asked me, which was if we want to mimic the language of the Psalms and incorporate its approach into our own writing, what would that look like? I really liked that question. So if we were to, like any part of scripture, if we were to speak it and say it constantly, let it guide our hearts and our tongues and form everything we say, like what would that look like? Whether that's in conversation or in our own poetry and prose. One person I would point to who does that really well would be St. Augustine.
I love him.
In his Confessions, this is another book that I used to teach, so it's something I loved returning to year after year. But he quotes the Psalms more fluently than anybody I ever know. It's like, it feels like every other sentence is a reference to a Psalm. And all of his images, and even I think probably his Latin too, is reflecting the form and structure and the images that in the Psalms. And so I think that's a really beautiful example I don't know. I just want to read a little bit of this because I think it's a really good example. It's the very first paragraph of the Confessions, and my footnotes, pretty much every sentence is footnoted with a reference to a psalm. So this is Augustine saying, "Great are you, O Lord, and exceedingly worthy of praise. Your power is immense, and your wisdom beyond reckoning. And so we humans, who are a due part of your creation, long to praise you. We who carry our mortality about with us, carry the evidence of our sin, and with it the proof that you thwart the proud. Yet these humans, due part of creation as they are, still do long to praise you. You stir us so that praising you may bring us joy, because you have made us and drawn us to yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." So if you didn't know that wasn't a psalm, you might think it was.
Yeah.
So that would, and I think our pastors do this in church all the time too, where you can just hear that even if they aren't quoting scripture, they're paraphrasing it. Our hymns do this all the time too. If it's not a direct quote, it's a paraphrase.
Yeah.
But
I just got a little teary-eyed
Well,
listening to
it's
that.
so lovely, isn't it?
Like, I could feel my face, like, relaxing as you read it. And it's just, like, I want to write like that.
Me too. Goals.
So one of our things that we're doing with this series of episodes is indeed about writing. So if someone wanted to write a psalm, what advice do you have for them? How do you start? What aspects do you try and do it all? I think trying to do it all would be, that's trouble in any kind of poetry. You can't do it all. You got to pick something. So what advice would you have for someone?
That's a good question. I would say lay down some rules. Like you said, limitations. Limitations are very freeing. So I would say,
there's your quote for Instagram, Sarah. Limitations are very freeing. Beautiful.
I love it. That's perfect.
Do not become an Instagram poet. I would say, like, if you're trying to write a psalm, I would say pick a form, pick a sonnet or something like that, or at least pick iambic pentameter. So English lends itself very naturally to iambic pentameter. So go for 10 syllables per line. Go for unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed syllables.
It sounds like this. Da 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 da.
Yeah. So if you aren't hearing that in your sentence, then you're doing something wrong.
If you're trying to write an iambic pentameter.
Right. And so I think that's a good limitation to give your sentence some form that it might not have otherwise. And rhyming might help too. And then the other thing I would say is I would pick an image and pick something, some point of comparison. And then maybe also pick something that has always baffled you in scripture. Like how you should have some kind of a question that, like, pick a question, pick an image that you want to meditate on. So it can be a question that scripture raises, or it can be just something that so it's any verse that has ever confused you, and then see if you can kind of riddle something out. But
that's great.
That's really helpful. Actually.
Yeah. And I just thought of something that, like, you could write a psalm about Jesus because we know all about him, which David only got little glimmers of. I mean, David wrote lots of psalms about Jesus. He just didn't quite have the full picture that we have.
Yeah. A psalm looking backwards instead of a psalm looking forwards.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or like baptism or any of those like New Testament concepts.
Oh, speaking of,
they were looking
baffling questions.
Our brains are all working on this now.
Okay. If your brains are working on this too, we should probably segue and talk some more about what we're going to be asking each of our listeners who are.
And then Sarah might have some more suggestions when she's heard more about the specifics.
Okay. So this is introducing our challenge to you. We are going to finish up our month on the Psalms with a Write This episode. The Write This challenge. And actually, Sarah Reinsel, you are invited to join us for this.
Yes.
Because these are incredibly fun and often very, like, I grow on the inside every time I do one of these. Write This challenge. So how this works is Sarah Gulseth in our Facebook group we'll post a link to an online form where you can submit your entry for this. There's no prize.
We do have stickers to give away for this one.
Oh, there's a prize. They're
already printed.
We have the nicest stickers. You guys want these stickers. So does everyone get a sticker, Sarah?
If you submit a psalm, yes.
All right, everyone. So your challenge for this Write This challenge is to write your own psalm. It doesn't have to be long. Could just be a couple of verses. As long as it's shorter than Psalm 119, you are in the zone. And to use one or more of these poetic things that we've talked about. It doesn't have to rhyme. It can, as Sarah Reinsel says, quote, limitations are very freeing, end quote. So it can have rhythm, it can have rhyme, it can have line structure. It doesn't have to. It can be free verse, but it should be poetic. Build off some deeper truth that we see in scripture, echo God's words to us. It should have some sort of imagery or poetic language. Think metaphors, similes. It can use some of this cool parallelism we've talked about. It can even be a chiasm. Bonus points if you manage to pull off a chiasm, because they're not easy.
I'm totally shooting for a chiasm, by the way.
I'm going to try that. Chiasm is nice. There are very clear rules for what you have to do. So just follow the rules.
Perfect.
It's very orderly. We love the orderly stuff.
I love orderly.
I will actually, in the show notes to this episode, I will link to an article by, I believe it's a Hebrew scholar, that talks about a variety of biblical literary devices that you might find inspiring. I will be referencing or pulling from some of those. But this is meant to be a literary exercise. It's also meant to be a devotional exercise. We went back and forth when we were starting to think about putting this challenge before you of, can we even write Psalms? Because Psalms are scripture and we don't write scripture. I'm not King David. I have the Holy Spirit in my baptism, but I don't have that like extra super duper portion of the Holy Spirit that the writers of scripture had. And yet we came down to it in the end and said a psalm is a poem that is also a prayer, that is also a meditation on God's greatness and his love for us. And we can absolutely be writing psalms. Most of the hymns we sing would probably qualify as psalms. And so to dive into this and to use some of these beautiful poetic devices to bring some of our own praises or laments to the surface, I think is going to be a really fun challenge. So I hope you all will join us. Watch for that link on Facebook in the Lutheran Ladies Lounge group. I presume it will be on Instagram too, Sarah?
Yes, it will.
It will.
We need these submitted by like end of day, whatever that even means for you. I'm not going to check it Wednesday, but Wednesday, June 12th. So we have time to compile them and record the episode for it to drop later in the month. So yeah, June 12th.
We love to read your writing on air. It is one of our favorite things to do. So we hope we get lots of submissions and that this is like a 2-hour episode because we have so many Psalms to read.
And like super extra bonus points if you want to like write a melody or set it to a melody or like pick a melody that we can sing it to. Like you can do that too.
Of Lilies of the Field. I always wondered what Lilies of the Field was. That is an actual note in the Psalms. That one of them was to be.
You can just declare that your psalm is sung to the melody and then not provide it. That'd
be true. You can.
Very authentic.
Very true.
Leave an air of mystery about your psalm.
Lots of creative license with this.
Yes. So, Sarah Reinsel, any final words of encouragement or advice for us as what are you going to be doing?
Okay. Well, let's see. I will definitely participate. I will have to think about what I will do. But I would say before you write anything, spend 2 hours reading psalms and reading other poetry, just so you can like get it in your head, what it should sound like. Yeah, the best writers read all the time. So that's if you get stuck, then just start reading.
Great advice.
That's really good advice.
I think it might also be, as this is a devotional activity, praying before you write is always a great idea because oftentimes, especially, and isn't it funny how when you read scripture, it then informs the words of your prayers? And then that combination of God's word in, prayer out, then shapes the rest of the language that comes out of you, for the day. At least that's how it works for me. My words are not nearly as beautiful or gracious if I have not been in the word and prayer quite enough.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any favorite devotional poets? Obviously, Augustine, who is not a poet, but should be.
He writes poems too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah? We should look up Augustine's poems. Okay. But if we were going to read poetry to get us warmed up for writing psalms beyond the psalms, what would you recommend?
Oh, good question. Hang on. Do you mind if I walk over and look at my bookshelf?
Not at all. Please do
My
that.
poetry bookshelf, not the one that's behind me.
She has multiple bookshelves
in the background.
So I think, you guys have read George Herbert.
Oh, we love
in
George
your book
Herbert.
group recently. So definitely him. John Donne.
Love him.
Gerard Manley Hopkins
Okay.
is also very good. I really like, he's a Polish poet, Czesław Miłosz. He might be a little too obscure, but he's also, his poems are deeply informed by scripture too. Maybe read some Shakespeare.
Shakespeare would not write very good psalms, but his iambic pentameter is excellent.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Yep, I think that's what I've got. Go read some hymns too.
Oh, you'll never hear
course.
us say no to that.
Always read more hymns.
And read them as poetry too. And also pay attention, because we have the same problem with hymns that we have with psalms. We're so familiar, we miss half of the poetic artistry that's happening in them. You really just got to slow down and take it apart line by line, word by word, and you'll be surprised. You'll be like, that was hiding in plain sight and I missed it.
Yep. And you can do that even without a hymnal, because you can go to like hymnary.org or something and they just have texts written out as like a poem. So you don't even get distracted by the music. You just read it. It's beautiful.
Well, I think I'm feeling inspired now.
I am too.
We can do this.
I think I know what I want to write about, but we're going to see. We'll see what's going to happen.
I think I do too, but it might be weird. Is that okay?
I have no idea yet. So listeners who are like, I don't know yet. I also do not know yet. So it'll come
I'll probably
to me.
change my mind like 10 times between now and actually sitting down to write.
Yeah, I might start doing a chiasm and be like, Sarah, what are you thinking? This is not going to happen.
I am in over my head.
I like biting off way more than I can chew. That's totally my MO. It's fine.
Yep, it's fine.
Sarah, this has been really, really fun to talk about poetry and the Psalms with you. We have to have you back on for something else because this has just been super fun.
Okay, someday my dream is to read Confessions in book club. If we ever do that, you want to be first in line to come on and talk with us?
Yeah, count me in. I love the Confessions.
We may need to run up to it, but
that would be really fun.
I think, it's doable. I taught it to juniors in high school. We could, I think it's very doable. We could read it.
You're not everyone juniors in high school can do. Your high school was a little bit above my high school, I think. Yeah. We read The Scarlet Letter. Is that bull?
Yeah, we did too.
Oh, thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
I miss hanging out with you, girl. I really do.
I miss you too, Rachel. Come back to St. Louis soon.
All right, ladies, we will have the specifics for the Write This Challenge in the show notes for this episode, but also just keep a watch in the Facebook group and our Instagram page.
If you want to check out everything that Sarah Reinsel has been working on, you've got to go over to witness.lcms.org, where you have raised the artistic caliber of the Lutheran Witness blog significantly. Yes, we've noticed. And and also you're doing some wonderful work with Reporter and Engage too?
Yes, and Engage.
Yes, Lutherans Engage the World. So if you want to see Sarah Reinsel's writing, look at any of the LCMS publications coming your way and watch for her byline, because she is doing some great work in our church.
Yes, absolutely. You can join us in our Facebook group and follow us on our Instagram to keep up with everything that's happening with the Lutheran Ladies Lounge, including this Write This Challenge. You can find all of our episodes at kfuo.org/Lutheran Ladies Lounge, or on your favorite podcasting app, or on the KFUO radio app. You're listening to the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Erin.
And I'm Rachel.
Views and opinions expressed on the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast may not represent the official position of the management or ownership of KFUO Radio, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Ladies Lounge is produced by KFUO Radio and available at kfuo.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a review for us too. If you love the Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast, consider financially supporting our producer, KFUO Radio, so we can keep doing what we do. Find out how at kfuo.org/give. The Lutheran Ladies Lounge podcast is underwritten in part by Lutheran Heritage Foundation. LHF translates, publishes, distributes, and introduces books that are Bible-based, Christ-centered, and Reformation-driven. Learn more about their global ministry and how to support their projects at lhfmissions.org.
I'm assuming this is going to get edited
for
out.
just a minute, and let me acknowledge the fact that a teenager just screamed in my dining room downstairs, and it picked up on the mic. My kids are having a D&D session right now. Apparently, someone just got stabbed or something.
Huh.
Amazing.
I really hope that comes through on the recording because I want to put it in as an outtake.
I wish I had a soundproof recording booth. That would be great.
Oh, okay.